shows the zeitgeist of the time and what was happening in the English Renaissance, which England was a little bit behind the times with the Renaissance, mainly because the Renaissance was very much about an active relationship with Italy, right? And King Henry VIII had kind of broken off from Rome. So England had kind of isolated itself from a lot of the other things that were going on in Italy. And do you remember why? This is the beginnings, of the Church of England. This is after Martin Luther. Protestantism is starting, breaking away from the Catholic Church. When Martin Luther, nails things saying, we're not gonna do the Catholic, we're gonna do this other thing. That's starting to happen. That's gonna be the cause of a lot of wars, Protestant and Catholic. Still tension in Ireland between Protestant and Catholic. It was really, really bloody through the whole kind of, this whole next several hundred years in terms of religious wars, with Christian against Christian. It wasn't Christian against Muslim, which was already bad enough. Now it was Christian against Christian. But, so Henry VIII, right, says, we're going to have our own church, we're going to embrace Protestantism, screw you, Pope, screw you, Catholic Church, because why?
So he could divorce his wife.
So he could divorce his wife and marry Anne Boleyn, right? Who's going to be the mother of Queen Elizabeth, who's going to be the reigning monarch, in Shakespeare's time. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about Elizabethan England and Shakespeare. So England is not really in the whole kind of Renaissance thing. Actually, before we go to, I'm going to just give you a quick, this is another thing that you have a timeline, and we're going to come back to it because this timeline is actually going to become really, really much more significant when we get to France and some of the other things, and Italy, the kind of work that's influenced by the Renaissance much more directly. So you also have, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is kind of color-coded, right? So remember what I sort of said, there's all these facts, there's all these dates, there's all these things that happen, but they kind of are all part of these big sweeping magnets of ideas. So I color-coded this for you, so that you can see that there's basically several various things. The Renaissance is about dramaturgy, which is the form and content of plays. This is when Aristotle is rediscovered. There's going to be a whole kind of argument about how to interpret the poetics, how to interpret the unities. What is unity of time? What is unity of place? What does it mean to, to have these kind of elements of theater? So that the kind of, and it has all the influx of classical elements. Suddenly we're talking about myths. In Dr. Faustus, Faustus falls in love with whom? The Helen of Troy, right? That's a classical thing. He references Icarus at one point, There's kind of a little semblance of a chorus, right? There's these kind of classical references. Yet on the other hand, there's all kinds of medieval things, because who appears in his room? The seven of them. The seven deadly sins, right? And there's the other thing, too, that you might have seen in commercials that they still use. Got one on your shoulder and the other one on your other shoulder, right? You still see this. The good and the bad angel, right? That's a trope that people still use. So the good angel and the bad angel say, no, you should do this. No, you should do this, right?
I was just wondering, is this play where that originated from? Like the good angel?
No, that was a common belief that used to be tempted. That was this whole thing of what this was, psychomachia, the battle for the human soul.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Marlowe kind of popularizes it, but it's very much in the zeitgeist. He puts the seven deadly sins in the play, but the seven deadly sins have been talked about for years, right? So he doesn't invent them, but he kind of, he collides all this kind of classical stuff from the Renaissance with medieval. So what he's doing is that he's bringing those two things together. And in a way, this is really emblematic of where Elizabethan England is. Because they haven't quite, they're behind the times in terms of the Renaissance. France Italy, they're embracing all this art, all this neoclassicism, whatever. England's still a little stuck in medieval times, partly because they've divorced themselves from the cultural thing. It's one reason they're so obsessed with Italy. Shakespeare's going to write a lot of plays set in Italy. First of all, if the characters were English, they couldn't do what they did, right? So there's a freedom in them being Italian. And then there's this fascination with what's going on in Italy, right? Because it sounds so fabulous, and so free and so wonderful. And like, this is a big thing where people say Shakespeare couldn't have written the plays because whoever it was probably went to Italy, but it's not a real Italy. It's the Italy of Shakespeare's plays are the Italy of the imagination.
Well, it's just like, Romeo and Juliet's based off of Romeus and Juliet, right?
Yeah.
So did Romeus and Juliet take place in Italy, or?
It was, there are a lot of, we'll talk about this when we talk about Shakespeare, because a lot of these, let me quickly, all right, okay,
I
just
like how you didn't even change the girl's name, though. Just Romeus.
We're just gonna. So, I don't. Oh, here we go. Okay, so one of the things was dramaturgy, right? We were talking about dramaturgy. So this is a thing, I put it on the blackboard and I'll send it to you because this will be, one of the things that's going to be a background for our conversation about what's happening in England. So in Renaissance Italy, there's trade routes, it's the seat of the Roman Catholic Church. It becomes a real interest and support for scholars, for writers, for artists. It's like culture. Culture becomes the idea that maybe it's not about religion, maybe it's not about it's about culture. Culture is what makes a society. So that's a lot of what the Renaissance is, that, if you're a great city, you have painters, and you have sculptors, and you have musicians, and you have writers, right? So culture, and if you're a nobleman, you support that, because that's what the Greeks did. They supported the culture. So if you're going to be a great country, a great city-state, as it was a lot in Italy, very like Greece, there's city-states. Florence is going to compete with Venice, is going to compete with Verona. Verona is that, you don't want anybody from Verona. Verona is like Newark, in Italy. There's like all these kind of really, you're supposed to be from Florence, or Rome, or Venice, Naples, Verona. There's kind of little Italian things, snobberies, that actually inform the play. Like in Taming of the Shrew, the fact that Petruchio is from this other place, which is kind of looked down on, is really a factor in the dynamics and power structure of the characters of the play.
So it's probably like in Fair Verona, where we set our scene. Like they were like whenever the chorus was doing it, like Fair Verona.
Yeah, it could be. And it's like, well, of course this stuff happens in Verona, right?
Okay.
Of course they act like that in Verona. It's Sparta. It's just like the Athenians going, of course, Clytemnestra, she's in Sparta. Women can take over in Sparta.
Or what's the woman from Lysistrata with the accent? Yeah.
Colonica. Right. With the Southerns. Yeah, same thing. So there's a kind of hierarchy that's in Italy that sort of figures into some of the thing, whether you're from, Venice, what, Verona, Padua, it's a little different. So these types of things. So there's all this. So here's like Scipio. Shakespeare's going to take some of these are kind of dramatic theorists who are going to interpret Aristotle, but they're also going to write a lot of plays. And these plays are going to be adapted by, not just Shakespeare, by other English Elizabethan authors. They're going to take these plays, same way Terence took Menander's plays and adapted them. The English writers are going to take a lot of these Italian plays and spin on them. So here, and when we get to Shakespeare next week, I'm going to send you, this will help inform your presentations on the play. I'm going to send you the whole source list of what he pulled from. In terms of Richard III is Richard III because Holinshed, who was a historian at the time, put out a history. When you look at the chapter on Richard III, you go, oh my God, it's all lies. It's propaganda, right? It's propaganda because they're trying to shore up the Tudor line, because the Tudor line deposed the Plantagenet line. So it's propaganda to shore up Elizabeth. That, yeah, well, your great-grandfather actually, usurped the throne. No, he didn't. Richard was a terrible king, and that was like, get rid of this horrible king.
What was
And
the
so,
king that usurped it from Richard III?
Henry the
No,
First.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Henry, that's right.
So you see, like they're sort of analyzing the poetics, but they're also going to write plays, and these names are going to show up, and we'll return to them when we go back to Shakespeare. So Marlowe. Okay. So yeah, I'm here. So dramaturgy. So the whole idea of dramaturgy, the whole idea of this of classical, going back to classical ideas, referencing classical myths in the text. You reference Icarus. You talk about Helen of Troy. Choruses are sometimes used. All the kind of ideas that are classical ideas of the text. But also in Dr. Faustus, there are these, all the medieval stuff, and the fact of Dr. Faustus, selling his soul, and then over 24 years, which is a unity if you look at the unity of time as being 24 hours, except it's 24 years, right? So that's a classical thing with a medieval twist to it. So Dr. Faustus, more than any play, really shows the collision of these two schools of thought. So all the sort of things with red are dramaturgy. Here, Greek. All the Greek writers, students are starting to study Greek, right? So when Shakespeare didn't speak Greek, so it has this little, that's another argument that Edward de Vere probably would have spoken Greek, or learned Greek as a nobleman. Shakespeare didn't know Greek. He knew Latin, he didn't know Greek. And there's a kind of thing, it's like when in Julius Caesar, when they say Cicero, I don't know, what did he say? He spoke in Greek. Well, what did he say? I don't know, it was Greek to me, right? The famous line. This kind of this in-joke, the fact that Shakespeare did not speak Greek. So here you start seeing all these classical plays. First you have a Senecan form with a Christian subject, then you're going to have classical subject and form. And again, these topics and these, you're not going to supposed to write Achilles and gods, right? The church said, no, we can't have that. All this stuff is going to come back. It's going to be rediscovered. And so it's the Renaissance, art, sculpture. It's going to influence painting. The whole stage design is going to be influenced by the painting that's happening. The vanishing point, forced perspective is going to happen in painting. That's going to be translated to stage design. The great scenic designers of Italy are going to be brought to France because France decides, okay, we're not going to be the big colonizer with ships like Spain was and now England is, as England's starting to rise, but we're going to have culture. So Cardinal Richelieu, and Louis the 14th, the Sun King, is going to say, we're going to have a great culture in France that's going to be like Athens. And so neoclassicism, when we get to that, is going to happen. But you sort of see, and then another big one is Niccolo Machiavelli. So Machiavelli, who's Machiavelli? And what is his impact?
Psychotic monarchist kind of.
Well, it's interesting because some people say he wasn't that. He also was a playwright. He wrote The Mandrogla and whatever, and that he wasn't that. He wrote this book in order to kind of get a job within the Medici family, which was the huge ruling family of Florence, which was like Venice. Florence and Venice had a kind of competition with, and Rome too, of like who was going to be the most impactful. But the Medicis, if you... they were a really interesting family. Not as interesting as the Borgias.
Yeah, the Borgias.
The Borgias were,
corrupt
whoa,
as
the
hell.
Borgias were pretty crazy.
Where were the Borgias located?
They were everywhere. And they
One of
ended
them
up,
was
one
the
of them
Pope,
became
yeah.
Pope. And they killed people and it was totally cool.
They owned the world for a while.
They were really powerful. The Borgias are kind of, the
There's a
Medicis are
TV
much
show
more,
about them that
the
I
Medicis are kind of like Warren Buffett. The Borgias are like the Koch brothers. if
Is
you
that
want
related
to.
to like the bourgeoisie?
Huh?
Are those terms related? Bourgeoisie?
No. Bourgeois is not bourgeois. Bourgeois is B-O-R-G-I-A.
But they're not, like,
Nothing to
related
do with the
any-
middle
okay,
class.
okay.
Oh, no. The
Okay.
bourgeois is no.
Didn't they like try to kill the Medici, like somebody?
Oh, yeah.
it's-
It was all about power. It was all about money and power, and they were ruthless. But it was the whole idea of how. So Machiavelli wrote this book called The Prince, and I'm going to put a chapter breakdown in the blackboard as well as the text so you can look at. This was Karl Rove's supposedly favorite book. He kept it by his bedside, and The Prince very much. What time are we at?
We're at like 2:30.
Okay, all right, good, we can do this. So, The Prince very much informs, have you ever seen this, the 48
No.
Laws of Power? Okay. A lot of this comes from The Prince, and a lot of this informs. As we go through this, okay. Never outshine the master, thank you, yeah. Where's the soundtrack? Hold on.
Robert Greene wrote for The Rose, right? Is that the,
Oh, this is later, this is contemporary Robert Greene.
okay, not the
That
same.
was a pastoral, he wrote pastorals, yes.
Yeah.
He wrote pastorals. Okay, hold on. I really want the music, this music is really kind of cool. No, I think the sound is down. Yes, all right. Okay. So,
Oh, there we go. Learn how to use enemies.
learn how to use enemies, right? This is Machiavelli. Also Machiavelli. Think about politics and like,
Yeah.
you know, like what?
House of Cards.
Right, House of Cards. That's Richard III. Always say less than is necessary.
Or like Nixon.
I actually learned this instinctively. Reputation. Shakespeare's going to say, the characters are going to say, my reputation, the most important thing. Yep. So, also Machiavelli. I think that's actually Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Right? We do this as human beings. Avoid the unhappy and the unlucky and the people who are getting down. Learn to keep people dependent on you. Don't allow them freedom from you.
Yeah. Well, that was his whole thing. Is like you give the people just what they need.
That's right. Give
Then
them
they
what they
always
think they
need
need
you,
or want.
yeah.
But just enough to keep them dependent.
Yeah. Because it's better to be feared and respected than loved.
Appeal to self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude. This is advertising uses this, politics uses, pose as a friend, that's total Machiavelli.
Looks like an advertisement.
This is going to really influence the Jacobean writers. The Jacobean writers are really going to be influenced by Machiavelli. No, unfortunately. A lot of these are Machiavelli, though. A lot of them. This is Machiavelli. Do not offend the wrong person, right? You don't know, who's gonna become anyone. Do not commit to anyone. This is what Queen Elizabeth is going to do. This is why she doesn't get married, right? Because that's the way she keeps her power. This I do this.
I feel like
I do that. I've done that my entire life. That's why I do my little,
I feel like that directly contradicts your reputation law. Concentrate.
I agree, it does.
a lot of these are going to be contradictory.
Yeah, that and use absence versus
Yeah.
don't build this fortress.
Yeah. But it's isolation, you're there and then you remove yourself. It's a tactic, it's not isolation.
Okay.
Recreate yourself, Madonna, David Bowie,
Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. Have someone else do your dirty work for you. This is what the Borgias excelled at. They had Ramini or whatever his name was that did all their dirty work. Richard III is going to be very much informed by a lot of this. I mean, it's interesting when you see how they're applied, right? Control the options. That's what's happening. Your options as students and student debt. Your options are being controlled.
Yeah, they tell us you can't go to college.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. What's the vulnerability? Each one of us has a vulnerability. What is it? What do we care about? What can be used against us?
Yeah, that's like in Game of Thrones when he says, when Joffrey says, "I'm the king," and he says, "A real king doesn't say I'm the king."
Game of Thrones is very Machiavellian
Yeah, absolutely.
because it's Richard III, but it's also playing directly on the prince.
I mean, because that's like,
Yeah.
I mean, Peter Dinklage is.
I do that. It really works.
Wait, what was that one?
Spectacles. Disdain for things that you can't have, so,
okay.
like sour grapes. Iago. That's actually another, if someone wants to look at Shakespeare's Machiavellian characters, that's another thing that could be on your list.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
Like Iago, and Richard.
love to see the-
Well, that's going to come into, because we're going to talk about Richard III, and we'll actually talk about, that's going to thread through a lot in terms of Machiavellian. So, in terms of Christopher Marlowe wrote a lot of Machiavellian characters. The Jew of Malta, Tamburlaine, which was the great sort of, he was one of the warlords that came through in Afghanistan. It's a whole history of Tamburlaine coming from the east and sort of invading Europe. Timberlenko was his historical name. So Marlowe would write about these very Machiavellian characters. But Marlowe himself was an interesting kind of Machiavellian character because he was really ambitious. There's a writer named David Grimm who did a play called Kit Marlowe, which was done at the Public Theater maybe about 10 years ago, which looked at Marlowe's life as if it was a Marlowe play. Because Marlowe is really interesting. So Marlowe is one of what was called the university wits. He was a contemporary of Shakespeare, but his murder, because he was murdered, and there's a whole thing in terms of assassination, was he,
was it by a playwright or like a owner or whatever, or was it?
Well, there's a very funny play called Murdering Marlowe. That's puts the fact that Shakespeare actually had him killed so that Shakespeare could move into his place. Because if Marlowe had lived, Shakespeare might not have been Shakespeare. Because Marlowe's death kind of made room for Shakespeare to enter as the premier writer. So there are a lot of Elizabethan writers, and each one of them had their sort of thing, like Robert Greene. Robert Greene wrote a lot of pastoral things, like some people, when you look at A Winter's Tale, there's a very funny play called Cheapside, which is about the relationship between Robert Greene and Shakespeare. And Robert Greene is the one who called Shakespeare
Upstart Crow.
Upstart Crow, dressed in a player's hide, which he steals from Shakespeare's line about Margaret, Queen Margaret.
What did you
Oh,
say this was
tiger's
called?
heart in a woman's hide. So Robert Greene is going to call Shakespeare an upstart crow.
What did you say? The
Huh?
play is called Cheap.
Cheapside. It's called Cheapside. And at the end, when Robert Greene dies, he's in the midst of writing a play, and Shakespeare comes into his study, and he looks at the play, and it's the pastoral scenes of A Winter's Tale. It's all the shepherd scenes of A Winter's Tale, which is really funny. And some people think that it's interesting because, like, playwrights would collaborate with each other. This is before copyright. A playwright would just sell his play outright to a company of actors. And the actors had shares in the company. So if you wanted to make money, you had to be an actor. So one of the reasons that Shakespeare had a share in the Lord Chamberlain's Men and later the King's Men is that he was also an actor. He didn't make money from the plays. The play would just be sold outright. If you've seen, we might look next week a little bit of Shakespeare in Love, because actually the whole setup of the world
It's like my favorite movie of all time.
is really, really good.
So
The whole setup of the world and the kind of like little things that Stoppard has, all the
Yeah.
little in-jokes that he has, when you know some of this, you'll get them so much more because he has a ton of them.
Well, and then like
The more
whenever,
you know, the funnier it is because, he just really has all these
when like
little
Ned
in-jokes.
Allen comes in and he's like, I have a part for you.
Yes.
And it's like Mercutio, and he's like, well, what's the play called? He's like,
Mercutio!
Mercutio.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So Marlowe is one of the university wits. Now, the university wits are all the students that really they go to Oxford, but mainly a lot of them go to Cambridge. And what they're doing is that they're going to school, they're going to university, they're your age, they're going to university, and they're putting on plays in the courtyard of the inns, of the dorms that they're staying in, which are kind of the inns, and they have courtyards, and they'll put on plays in the courtyards, and they'll write student plays. And so a lot of them, the university wits. It's Greene, and it's Marlowe. Marlowe, however, comes from a different class. He's born the same year as Shakespeare, he's 2 months older than Shakespeare. So they both come from working class parents. And Marlowe really feels the difference.
What's the conspiracy that some say he was Shakespeare?
Yes, some people, there's a whole Shakespearean thing, which we'll talk about next week,
Okay.
where a lot of people say Shakespeare couldn't have written the plays because he was the son of a working class Glover,
even though his dad
from
was the
Stratford.
mayor.
Well, but of
And his
Stratford on Avon.
But his mother
That's
was
like,
royalty, descended of royalty, wasn't she? 'Cause
Well,
she was
upper
married
class,
Arden.
not royalty, but upper class.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was an Arden.
Right,
So,
exactly.
An Arden was, it was kind of royal, not royalty, but it was like part
But
of
it
the
was-
nobility.
yeah, it was
nobility.
nobility.
It was nobility. Yeah.
But
she
I mean,
married-
if his dad was mayor, then he was definitely educated. He was definitely.
he was
had-
educated,
Yeah.
and the whole thing is like public education in England at that time was really, really good
Yeah.
for men.
Yeah.
For men.
Of course, he did get sold as a like a woman
Yeah. So.
into marriage.
So Marlowe, his father was a shoemaker, right? And his sister Anne had a really bad reputation, kind of promiscuous and whatever. So she was a bit of a disgrace. So Christopher Marlowe, he gets accepted because he's super, super smart, right? He gets accepted, but he's not one of the upper class, more aristocratic university wits. So he really feels it. It's like Strindberg, later, is going to really feel his class difference, and it's going to grate on him. And so Marlowe, but one thing about Marlowe is that suddenly, he goes to the King's very good school in Canterbury. He gets a scholarship to go to university from the Archbishop of Canterbury. There's some sort of feeling that maybe they're trying to get him into the priesthood, into theology, whatever. But suddenly he starts disappearing from school for large stretches of time. And then when it comes time to graduate, they basically say, you've been absent. We can't give you, a degree. You've hardly been here. You've been gone for months at a time. And then suddenly someone intervenes and says, no, he needs to get his degree. And that someone is Give a guess.
Shakespeare.
Huh?
Shakespeare.
No.
No, it was
Oh,
Queen. It was
God.
the Queen, right?
Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Queen
God.
Elizabeth.
'Cause
So,
she I mean, didn't she end up being Shakespeare's patron, kind of, at the end?
oh yeah, she loved
Yeah.
Shakespeare.
Yeah.
She loved Shakespeare. One of the reasons Shakespeare became really
But
successful.
there is a conspiracy that she was the one that had Kit Marlowe assassinated.
That's
right?
one of the theories. There's
Yeah,
several
because
theories. He was
he
like,
was an
yeah. So
atheist.
he's in a bar in Deptford, and he's killed by Ingram Fraser, who sticks a knife through his eye. There's a play called Marlowe's Eye by Naomi Iizuka. That's a really interesting play about that. So some people say it was just a drunken fight over who was going to pay the bill, and they were drunk and kind of went at it. Some say Marlowe was homosexual, and he was like, homosexuality was there in the society. You just weren't upfront about it. He was very upfront about it. You know, he said, who doesn't love tobacco and boys is a fool, you know. So he was very upfront. Some
He was
people,
also an atheist.
he was also either an atheist, how do you know a lot about this? He was either an atheist or a closet Catholic.
Yeah.
That was, which Shakespeare also was thought that he was a closet Jesuit. So it was like all this kind of like, you know, thing. Even though Marlowe, the reason he wasn't at school was that he was a spy. He was spying on Catholics in France, right? So he would be sent off by Walsingham, which was Elizabeth's kind of, you know, right-hand person who was like incredibly Machiavellian, right? To sort of go and spy and, you know, kind of, you know, insinuate himself into the Catholic community. In Holland and in France. In Holland.
Faustus was towards the end of his career. Is that right, or is
Well,
that
his career doesn't last. He's young.
right? Right. But like, as far as like before he died and stuff, was Faustus towards the end?
No, Faustus is kind of here. We'll look at Faustus. Who's right in the middle. Faustus is right in the middle. And also, there's two versions. 1604 is the first version, which is the text that you have, which is much simpler. If you look at the summary of the play, there's Bruno and the Pope, and there's all this other much more pastoral, and the servants have a lot more. And a lot of people, there's a big debate of saying, well, did he add it? But most scholars think that William Byrd and Rowley, who were like writers much known for their, you know, sort of peasant and low humor and whatever. So the kind of all the stuff with the servant, you know, with Robin and the farmer and the horse and all that stuff. And then all the kind of subplot with Bruno and the Pope and all that kind of intrigue was actually added later in 1616 by two other writers. That Marlowe's original script pretty much stayed with Wagner, you know, with Faustus and his servant, and the deal with Mephistopheles, and this whole idea of, you know, selling your soul for power. And the big thing about Dr. Faustus is he sells his soul, right? At the beginning of the play, he rejects all these different things. He says, oh, I'm going to be a doctor,
Like
philosopher. Science, nah, I don't want that. You know, so what does he want to
Religion.
do?
He also turns down religion too.
He
which
turns
is
down
a little
religion. So what does he
blasphemous.
want? He wants necromancy, right?
Right.
He wants to like be a wizard. You know, he wants to be a wizard because he says he's looking for the road to power, right? So he says, okay, yeah, but skull, no, not that. And he's sort of like, and it's also like he says, "Que sera, sera," whatever will be, which becomes a song that Doris Day is going to sing. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. Originally written by Christopher Marlowe, which I think is hysterically funny. So Faustus, a lot of what Marlowe in his life and the characters he writes are very Machiavellian characters. We're going to see them in Shakespeare, and we're really going to see them when we get to the Jacobean writers, when we get to Webster and Ford, and things get really dark, and it's all about corruption, and it's all about, you know, how do you get over, and how do you manipulate, and, you know, how do you get one over, and it's like there's no sense of honor It's just how do you win in a situation? You kill, you poison, you do anything to win. It's like Richard III, it's a very Machiavellian character. So a lot of Marlowe's plays are going to deal with this kind of thing, the Jew of Malta. If you compare the Jew of Malta, for example, to Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice.
Well, isn't the kind of
they're very similar.
villain or whatever in Jew of Malta is
Barabbas. He's like horrible.
Which
he
one
like has a daughter.
Is that with Never mind.
Machiavelli actually has the prologue in the
Yeah.
Jew of Malta.
Okay.
The prologue in the Jew of Malta is spoken by Machiavelli as a character. So what Marlowe does, though, is that he brings in iambic pentameter. Like everyone says Shakespeare starts it, Christopher Marlowe starts it. Before Marlowe, there's what was called the galloping 14th, rather than, the thing about iambic pentameter, right? Da, 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 da. It's like, it's your heartbeat, and it's also the length of your breath. Most of us naturally tend to speak in iambs. About, if you listen to speech, there's a kind of natural iambic
and something about iambic
it's the
pentameter,
heartbeat.
when you are like if you have a character that has like all monosyllabic words, it like means that they're really getting a point across,
Right.
And like in life, when you're really
Right.
trying to get a point across,
That's the spondee.
It's exactly.
Spondee. It's like meter is so important. It's also, we've touched it a little bit with the Greeks, but the whole idea of like the anapest, right? It's like, meh, screw you, I'm going home, Cartman. And it's like when he's really, screw you, go home, That's like the spondee. Exactly. It's like boom, boom. And like the British translations love to do the trochee and 19th century poets, Longfellow, by the shores of Gitche Gumi, Basuda, wigwam of Naomi, daughter of the moon Naomi, for, 120 pages of trochees, So it's like, when the Greeks are translated by 19th century British authors, it's like, I'm not doing Greek play now, and you are going to listen to it. And it's like, shoot me now, please, going crazy. Rather than the Greeks were the dactyles and the ions, and it was like, it's a whole different feeling in the theater. It's musical, it's the dancing place, right? So meter is really important. So the galloping 14 was like 14 syllables, which was really like, it was a real mouthful. So what Marlowe did is that he brought it back and he put it in iambic pentameter. And that was his big. And then the Elizabethan writers said, oh my God, the audience loved it, the actors loved it. The speech I prelude trippingly on the tongue is about the, how you ride, the meter.
Well, and that monologue is literally like a summary of An Actor Prepares also.
Yes, it is.
I actually keep it in my wall.
Yeah, it's a great, his advice to the players is great. And the players are his traveling company coming to do an interlude at the palace. So that was the kind of form. Did I hear a question? Yeah.
You were comparing the Jew of Malta to the Jew from Merchant of Venice.
Oh, yeah. So,
Can
well, we're going to talk about this during the presentations. Did someone pick Merchant? Does anyone pick Merchant as their first or second?
Hero's
Merchant of
Journey?
Venice? No. Merchant of Venice is a Shakespeare play.
Oh, okay.
Did everybody, by the way, does everybody have their sheets?
No.
These are all done.
Oh.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Is there an extra one?
Thank you.
I mean, I like.
Oh, no, I
like
did mine.
homosexuality.
Wait, I'm using that. You're yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the difference, when we talk about Merchant of Venice, I'll bring in a little bit more of the Jew of Malta. Basically, Merchant of Venice was considered a problem play because it's basically supposed to be a comedy. And Shylock is supposed to be like like we heard about the Senex comic, the Roman, he's supposed to be a comic villain. He's supposed to be the miser, right? He's the comic miser in a commedia play because it ends with a wedding. It's a comedy. The problem is that Shakespeare is too much of a humanist. But it would be really interesting to look at the famous speech that Shylock gives in the courtroom saying, and also have the other famous one, hath not a Jew, eyes, do we not feel pain when you prick us? Do we not bleed? Can that be made to be funny? It's a really interesting question. If you look at Merchant of Venice through the really anti-Semitic lens of Elizabethan England, that Shylock was a comic villain. When Christopher Marlowe writes The Jew of Malta, it is an evil, Machiavellian character who will kill his own daughter, will poison priests, will do anything to get power. The whole thing is similar. It's a response. It's like a dialogue. Marlowe and Shakespeare have a little bit of a dialogue. It's the same way that John Ford is going to have a dialogue with Romeo and Juliet. With 'tis pity she's a whore. It's like there's a lot of people responding. Someone will write a version of the play, and then someone will write another version. The Revenger tragedy. When we talk about Hamlet next week, Hamlet is written in the whole throes of this absolute popularity for a Revenger tragedy, and Shakespeare messes with it. Shakespeare messes with this idea of a comic villain of Shylock and says, actually, no. There's a human here that's more of a complicated character than the form of this comedy. Ends in marriages, Jews are looked down on, whole thing. He can't quite write it that way. It's why it's a problem play. If you look at Taming of the Shrew, but this is a debatable. Does he give Kate too much of her own full character rather than making her a complete comic, shrew that you can just laugh at? Does he complicate the relationship between those two characters? These are why a lot of these are called problem plays. They're also problem plays because we're also looking at them through our contemporary lens. And it was a different thing in Shakespeare's time. When we talk about all the women characters, Desdemona, in some ways, was supposed to be the perfect woman, Elizabethan woman, right? She really, she gets herself killed because she doesn't kind of go out and say, excuse me, right? Amelia is like a big mouth. She's got a big mouth. She's not the perfect woman in that play, right? So it's really interesting the way the characters are going to, again, just like the Greek plays, it's like this kind of cultural forensic, cultural anthropology. These plays, these works of art, give us a sense of how they reflect the attitudes of the time. So you have the attitudes, the kind of subtle ideas of what homosexuality is. Some people think that, Shakespeare also had an affair, was bisexual, that he had the dark lady of the sonnets, but that he also had the young man that he writes the love sonnets to. So there's a whole kind of thing that people, especially in more recent times, have started to analyze, some of the characters. The relationship, again, in Merchant of Venice, is Antonio in love with this young man? Is that why he lends him the money and puts himself out for it? When they did the film, Jeremy Irons was not so crazy about that idea, but Joseph Fiennes and the director loved it. So if you look at the film, you can see the way it's cut is that at one point Jeremy Irons is looking longingly out the window, saying, why, Antonio, are you feeling so sad? And then the director puts a cut in of, what's his name, Barbanchik? The young man, though, the one who Portia falls in love with. Bassanio, thank you, Bassanio. He looks out, and there's a cut of Bassanio coming, in the gondola, up the canal in Venice. And so you kind of go, oh my God, he's in love with Bassanio. Jeremy Irons actually did not make that choice. That choice was interpolated, though Joseph Fiennes played it that way, too, because he totally agreed with that. He totally thought that he was in love, that Antonio was in love with Bassanio. Was Iago somewhat in love with Othello? Was he jealous of Desdemona? It's really interesting the way, there's modern interpretations of the play, but also you kind of go, well, what's really going on? Because here you have a pretty outwardly gay character. One of the theories that Marlowe was killed is that he made a pass at Ingram Fraser. That actually was a story that went around, that he made a pass, he was drunk, and he grabbed, made a pass at Fraser, and Fraser freaked out and killed him. in a sort of act of homophobia, or that it was ordered to,
I think it's an
Walsingham
assassination.
ordered
Yeah.
him assassinated because he was
got
also,
cocky.
well, he got cocky and he was part of this whole thing with Sir Walter Raleigh, which was this thing that used to meet and they got into witchcraft and they were thinking of like the, the overthrow was, were they plotting to overthrow, the Queen and the whole thing with the Earl of Essex, and was Marlowe part of that, or was he actually secretly, on the side of the Catholics, and was he double agent? Yeah, there's all kinds of theories. So that he was assassinated, it was just a fight over a bar bill, that he made a pass at Ingram Fraser. But the fact is, Marlowe's life is kind of like one of his plays, which is why if anybody's interested in reading David Grimm's Kit Marlowe, it really makes Marlowe one of his characters. And his characters are very Machiavellian. They're all about how to get power. So Dr. Faustus, he makes this decision to be a necromancer, right? Because he wants power. But then what does he do with it, right? He's saying, okay, you're going to have 24 years, like it's a unity, like 24 hours in a day, right? It's 24 years. And what does he do with it? Does he, change history? Does he get wealthy? What does he do with his power? What does he end up doing?
Goes around.
You what?
He goes around wowing people.
He goes he does magic tricks.
Yeah.
Blends it around. He's like, I'm so cool.
He's a court jester.
Yeah.
He does magic tricks. He's doing what his servant, when they do, his servant kind of, I'm going to make him think that he's on a, horse, but he's going to go right into the water. He's just frittering it away. He doesn't use his power. Then he says, I'm going to have Helen of Troy. The face, was this the face that launched 1,000 ships? That is his line. That phrase comes from Marlowe. Just like, que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. Yeah.
Okay, two things. First, you said, some believe that, Shakespeare was bisexual, and there's an episode of Doctor Who where they go and they, see Shakespeare or whatever, and, they see him, and then he, flirts with the Doctor's companion, who's a woman, and then he, turns and he's like, oh, hi, I'm Will, or whatever, and flirts with the Doctor, and then he goes, it's David Tennant, and he goes 37 historians just peed themselves or something like that. It's really
David
funny.
Tennant's one of the great. His
He's
Hamlet,
one of the
he's one of the great
His Hamlet is
Shakespeares.
by far the best Hamlet I've ever
David
seen in my life.
Tennant is.
He's a god.
He's
Have you seen his new show?
No.
It's so good.
Is it good? Yeah.
But then I was gonna say as far as the whole should they be a comedic character, but they end up being humanists. Didn't a lot of people think that Romeo and Juliet was a comedy, and up until the first time it was shown, until Mercutio died,
Yeah.
and then they were like, oh wait, this is because
there's a twist.
it's so funny, it's so hilarious, and
Because
then
Romeo's such an idiot.
he's
He's a total moron. And Juliet comes in again. She is bigger than her container. Shylock is bigger than the container. Hamlet is bigger than the container. Juliet is bigger than the container. That she's supposed to be. Kate is bigger than the container. Shakespeare writes these characters that are just bigger than the standard
Well, he writes.
stock.
Especially for his time, he wrote really great female characters. There are
Played by boys.
yeah.
Just like in Greece,
Yeah.
right? Because women are not going to be on the stage until the English court has to flee the country
Well,
because
secretly,
of the
they,
Civil
of
War.
course,
well,
Shakespeare in
no.
Love,
yes.
It's like throws them all out there.
Yeah.
Gwyneth Paltrow was.
No people, women
No, that was a reach.
no, but there were noble women who were doing it in their houses.
Right.
They were
Yeah.
not
Did you see the Romeo and Juliet that just happened on Broadway with Orlando Bloom?
Yeah.
I heard it was terrible.
Well, I actually really liked Orlando Bloom because he kind of acted like an idiot.
He was
a
an
lot of
idiot,
people
yes.
didn't like it.
Yeah.
But that's how I've always pictured Romeo,
Yeah.
as an idiot.
Yeah,
But he
because
is
he's
an
like,
idiot.
oh, I love what's
He's
her
an
name? Is it
idiot.
Rosalind?
Yeah, Rosalind. Then all of a sudden, oh no, I know, I love you.
Shakespeare's go-to female name.
He does not deserve Juliet.
He's like, oh, I can't think of a name for this female character. Oh, Rosalind, I'll do.
The
There's
thing
like
is that
6
Juliet,
Rosalind.
he actually is made better by her. It's
Yeah.
like that Jack Nicholson line, "You make me want to be a better man." That to me is always like Romeo. It's like he meets her and something she changes. Because Juliet, okay, first of all, Shakespeare, I think, puts one of the greatest quotes about what love actually is. That love is a verb. Not love is like, I want this or but that love is a verb. You know, it's like, please. If people actually knew what love is, the world would be a different place. You know, it's not like, oh, it's in a transaction, I need this, I'm jealous, yeah. It's a verb, right? It's a verb. And Juliet says it. She says to him, 14-year-old girl, he puts the greatest words in. He does it, you know, with Portia, he does it with Desdemona, he just gives these women amazing speeches. And she says, remember the thing she said, my bounty?
My bounty is as bounty.
Love is as the sea. My love is deep. The more I give, the more I have, for both are infinite. It is the riding of the wave. It is the riding of the verb. It's an action. It's not a transaction. It's not a noun. It is a verb.
It's like that. Like if you know, like if my heart is full and your heart is full, and I give you some of my heart and you give me the same amount, then
Yeah.
it's endless.
Or even like if I just give to you.
Right.
She doesn't even say, you know, she says, if I just give to you. It's endless because it's going to be refilled. And if you ever have experienced that, it's absolutely
Not in 4 days.
true. It's absolutely true.
Not in one.
If there's
4 days.
any advice I would give you, is try to understand what that is. It'll change your life.
Well, Machiavelli would have a different interpretation.
Oh my God, Machiavelli would like, no. Machiavelli would try to ruin it.
Yeah.
Because that's the worst enemy to Machiavelli.
Yeah, love.
Because-
do not make the he specifically
No.
says love is like the worst thing you can do.
Yes, because it's like it's like self-knowledge, right? If you know who you are, if you're not defined by externals, if you don't say I'm only worthy because I get this, or I am this, or I am born this way, or look this way, or get this thing, if you're not a victim to that, first of all, you are so free. You're not controlled. Like he says, what's your thumb screw, If you don't have one, if you don't say, oh, I have to have this by this time, or I'm not worthy unless I am this, or do this, or, a celebrity, or have this much money, or own these pairs of shoes, or whatever it is, and you're sold every single minute
Well, it's
of
just
the
like-
day to sort of like, how do you define your identity? If you go back to the Greeks and Pythagoras and say, know yourself, and you go to Shakespeare and say, the more I give, the more who you are and what you ride. The verb you ride, I can't begin to tell you.
Well, I think it's like most like real villains. They just they have nothing to lose, whereas the hero has everything to lose. They can lose their love and their family, and so
Right,
it's
right.
that's how it always happens. And that's the Machiavelli standpoint. Is
Right.
love makes you weak.
Right.
With if you look at the Star Wars prequels, Anakin is he loses everything, and then
Yeah.
he just has nothing left, and so then he becomes evil. He becomes Darth Vader.
Because he has nothing inside of him.
Right.
Christopher Marlowe was never happy. He was never satisfied.
literally just
He
forced
was
on
he needed something he could never get. He felt less than. He wanted fame, he wanted power, he wanted status. He wanted all those things because he felt insecure. And, it's like the hole that is so deep in people, doesn't matter how much money they make, how much power they get, how many, it's like Scott Rudin. If you ever run into producer Scott Rudin, great producer, has done a lot of great films, great, I'm going to show you a picture of him. He is like, I look at him, I say, okay, your mother told you you were a piece of shit every day as a child, and you were teased for being a fat little boy. And I look at him and I go, oh my God, he's like a 5-year-old on the verge of tears, deep down. And it doesn't matter how many awards he gets, doesn't matter how many people he tries to destroy or build up or kingmaker, how many great projects he does. He's got a hole in him that is absolutely unfillable. And I just feel sorry for him.
Who is that?
Scott Rudin. Great producer.
Should bring up this picture.
Yeah. What's
Oh, here it is.
Ah,
I just looked it up.
No, there's one particular picture. Yeah, this is a good one. Look at his eyes. Can this get a little bigger? Anyway, this is a very good. Look at his eyes. Look into his eyes.
Yeah.
See it? See it?
Man, that's funny. There's
He's one
like
of the most
fake smoke
powerful
coming
men-
out of his
Yeah,
ears.
I know. But look at his eyes. He's one of the most powerful producers, and he's brilliant. He's got great taste. I mean,
How old
I-
is he?
he's in his 50s. Yeah, he's in his 50s. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, he'd be interesting to work with, but also life is too short.
Oh, you mentioned that Sway,
Ruin it, ruin
Marlo's
it all.
Naomi Izuka, which is
And what was the one that you said about Robert Graydon?
Cheapside. The author, I forget, it was done at, Carrie Perloff directed it. Oh my God.
Do you know
20
if
years
it's,
ago.
is it,
I think it's a British writer.
do you know if it's by a dramatist or if it's by Samuel French, published wise?
Oh, I don't know. But that'd be good to, it's terrific. It was done at the Union Square Theater like about 20,
Because I
25
love
years ago.
those like
Yeah.
historical fiction.
Well, there's The
plays.
Beard too, which is, what's her name? The Beard, which is like all these, like Shakespeare's actually the beard for like Marlowe and Queen Elizabeth, like all these people keep coming. Oh, could you put your name on my play? Which is another theory about Shakespeare.
Yeah, well,
is
that's like
he
that
was
movie.
just-
And
what a horrible movie.
I freaking hated that movie. It was so
That was
inaccurate.
Edward de
The
Vere,
movie that
right?
came out like a
The
couple
Do
years
what?
Theory. Was that the Edward de Vere? Earl
Yeah,
of
but it was
Oxford?
they like took out all this
Horrible.
stuff. Like they made it so that
Horrible.
Shakespeare couldn't read or write.
Yeah.
I was like, are you kidding me? So you're just gonna like change the facts? Like,
Murdering Marlowe is pretty funny too. It's by Charles Marlowitz, which is
Yeah, I added
Shakespeare.
that one to my-
Shakespeare sort of like behind the fact that I got to get rid of Marlowe so that I can move ahead.
I know this is kind of going backwards.
Charles Marlowitz.
And this is kind of going backwards, but I was really intrigued by the idea of like realizing that the church and the theater were in competition with each other.
Yeah.
I want to just like bring up the discussion of how is that today? Is
Yeah.
church or is theater still the competition of the church? Did it become less popular because theater became a really big thing in the 18th, 19th century? Is that why that started, like, religion started to diminish? Or is it because the melting
Well,
pot?
yeah. I mean, it's like what is that community building? In a way, it's also what builds community. What is at the? I mean, the internet was a huge thing. I love the internet because it's like the way it bonds people. You don't know what people look like. You don't know what gender they are. You don't know anything. It's like it's what they. A lot of times they say stupid things. And then that's who they are. There's someone who says stupid things. But you kind of find you build a community because you kind of share interests or you share ideas, and it's a different type. It's not about geography or whatever. So it's a whole thing about what binds a community together. What is the shared values, the shared ideas, what is being reflected. Because all of this, what we're looking at, again, I will say this over and over and over again until you get so sick of me saying it, but it's absolutely true. What we are looking at is about narratives. Who controls the narrative? What narrative is being told? Who is it being told to? Why is it being told? Who is benefiting from this particular narrative being told? Is it a narrative that binds a community? Is it a narrative that weakens a community? Is it a narrative that helps empower an identity, individual or group of people? Is it a narrative that disempowers, right? Is it a narrative that gives you a value that you're supposed to reach that is your value, core? Or is it a narrative that enforces a value that actually might not be your value, except that it's a narrative that repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats, right? Who are the gods? Who is who are our gods, What do we worship? What do we follow? All these plays, the reason we look at them is because a lot of them are either totally reflect the zeitgeist of the time, so we sort of have a sense of, okay, this is really what the people of Athens was, or they fight against it, right? Euripides, we're going to find what he opposed. We're going to find out about Athens because he's critical of it. Aeschylus, we're going to find out